for today's webinar on opportunities under Swami Fund for stressed affordable real estate projects in India in association with Pranjal International. Pranjal International Resolutions Private Limited is a registered insolvency professional entity working in the sector of stressed asset resolutions. Pranjal International is a part of the larger Pranjal Group working in the areas of investment banking, stress asset resolutions, etc. They have established themselves in the real estate as well as distress space. They hold a legacy of over 800 clients. We have with us Mr. Ankur Jain, Director at Pranjal. Ankur has worked extensively in the private equity and M&A 11 years with SBI Capital Markets and KPMG. Over the years, he has gained extensive experience in investment banking, stress asset resolutions, and venture funding. We have with us Ms. Ankita, the advocate with ICSI IIP. Today, she is the moderator for this session. I would request Mr. Ankur Jain to introduce us to the speaker of the day, Mr. Irfan Qazi. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you so much. Welcome, Irfan. As we all know, Irfan is the CIO of Swami Fund. Irfan has over 23 years of international work experience in various facets of international alternate investments, such as sourcing, analyzing, and recommending proposals for real estate and private equity investments, structuring and managing funds for private equity, international real estate, and hedge funds, and providing advisory services for mergers and IPOs. With more than 13 years of experience, he's been active primarily in real estate private equity investments at asset management companies such as ICICI Ventures, Everstone, AIG Global Real Estate, and L&T Infra. I now request Ankita and Irfan to kindly start the session.
Good evening, everybody. Before we start the session, I would just like to request all the participants that if they have any questions during the session, they can post them in the question and answer box that is below, and we'll take them up toward the end of the session. I'll be starting with giving a little bit of a brief introduction about the Swami Fund. So on 6th November 2019, the Honorable Finance Minister announced that the Union Cabinet had cleared a proposal to set up a special window in the form of an AIF, which is an alternate investment fund, to provide priority debt financing for completion of stalled housing projects. SBI Cap Ventures would be the investment manager to set up the first AIF under this special window. In the recent past, we have seen that several real estate projects have suffered due to a combined effect of two changes in the real estate sector. On one hand, we have incremental launches and slow sales that have increased unsold inventory in each project, while that effect has then gotten compounded by the fact that consumer preference is now towards completed projects rather than under construction projects. So this preference has mostly been developed as consumers are largely avoiding to take project completion risk and instead are more inclined towards completed projects. To enlighten us more about this fund, I would like to call upon Mr. Irfan Qazi, who is the Chief Investment Officer of the fund, to give us detailed information about the nitty-gritties of the fund. Mr. Qazi, over to you.
Thank you, Ankita. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity talking about the fund. I'll just get straight to it so that I can cover as much as possible, and then in the end, obviously there'll be hopefully there'll be some more questions. I've already answered many in the past, but I'll take as many questions as you have the time and the willingness to ask. So first, let me just take you in terms of the next, this monologue, which will go on for maybe the next half an hour or so. Just let me take you through the history of the fund, the mandate of the fund, give you an update, and this will be so that will be significantly different from the last update, the pace at which we are working at. Things keep moving fast, and then obviously, like I said, I'll take questions. So like Ankita mentioned, and she stole part of my speech, the fund was announced on 6th of November. That now seems such a long time ago because we have moved significantly since then. I keep repeating those words that we've moved from being a policy announcement to a mature, on-the-ground operative fund that has already cleared more than 100 proposals, that has already activated about 10 construction sites across the country. And so we are moving at a pace much faster than what we had, probably envisaged at the beginning. So to start with, this was, an announcement of this nature, a fund of this nature, 25,000 crores for stalled housing projects, was both unparalleled, unprecedented, massive in scale, right? Nothing of that sort has ever been tried in India before. What preceded this was, an understanding and appreciation of the scale of the problem. So we had done a market study prior to this, the entire window being announced, which was to estimate, what is the extent of the problem in the country. And these numbers have been stated many times, so bear with me. There are about 4.5 lakh units stalled in about 1,500 projects across the country. Almost 500 million square feet is locked up in these projects. And what changes the picture is the fact that it's not just a massive, number of homes that are stalled, but the fact that they are stalled after they have been significantly sold, and they are stalled for a significant period of time. What that means is there are a large number of home buyers who are trapped in these projects, right? So the projects got stalled only after they got sold. A lot of people have actually bought homes in these apartments, and these apartments have then these apartments have got stalled for a significant period of time. So that's one part. The silver lining here, the good news in the entire study was that it's not just a problem, there is also an embedded solution. So what we've concluded from the data is that, the data before the conclusion, the data shows that about 55,000 crores would be required to complete these housing units. That's a significant amount. But more importantly, it also shows that the value of the unsold inventory alone, and I'm not talking about receivables, locked receivables, only the unsold receivables is about only the unsold inventory is about 1.3 lakh crores. So 55,000 crores is needed to complete them. 1.3 lakh crores is the value of the unsold inventory in these projects. So these projects are clearly profitable, beyond doubt profitable. So what they need is a liquidity boost. It's more of a liquidity issue rather than a profitability issue. Now, once that was settled, that provided the framework for this special window that was announced by the government. So this was announced on November 6th. It was announced for affordable and mid-income housing units. It was announced for to provide capital to complete all stressed projects. So stressed projects would be stalled projects. Stressed projects would be projects that are facing difficulty, where it seems that if status quo continues, the project will get stalled sooner rather than later, right? So corrective action is needed now rather than waiting for the project to be stalled, and this fund can look at all such projects. So to start with, and I have repeated this definition so many times, so the only value add I'll try to do here is provide a little more insight into how we look at some of the definitions, right? So affordable and mid-income, it's a term that, the entire phrase was not defined. Affordable has been defined, in several laws in the country, but affordable and mid-income housing has not been defined. So we chose to create a definition for it as any housing which is one, less than 200 square meters, and two, within a certain price cap. And what is that price cap? Depending on the geography. If it's Mumbai, the price cap is 2 crores. If it's, any of the top 7 cities in the country, then the price cap is 1.5 crores. And for the rest of India, it's a 1 crore price cap. And every time I say this, I have to emphasize the fact that it's a very wide, very liberal definition by design, not by accident. So it's by design defined to include about 90 to 95% of all such stressed projects in the country. That's how the definition came into being, so that most of the projects in the country could be could be included here. Some finer points to this definition. Any project where at least 90% of the housing meets this definition qualifies for funding. So the remaining 10% can be shops, the remaining 10% can be penthouses, the remaining 10% can be larger apartments, more expensive apartments, or like I said, shops, and it does not matter. The project would still meet our criteria. Now, what happens many a times is we see projects which slightly breach the barrier, right? So the intent is still to do projects which are largely meeting this, but let's say there's a project which has maybe retail 12%, 13%, and so on. So what do? We ask the developer to fund the incremental 3%, 4% that is there. So we are still funding a project when 90% of the housing is stalled. We are also funding only homes. We are not funding second homes. We are not funding, hospitality projects, commercial projects, or anything of that kind. In fact, one of the things that we try to look for very closely is this a primary home project, or is this a secondary home project, or a second home project, or a weekend retreat kind of a project? And we do not do all of those. We only look at primary home projects. So that's that. We also look at plots. We also look at plotted developments. And we then, trace out how the same parameters for plotted developments. So as long as the plot plus assumed permissible construction on it meets the price and size criteria, we are okay with it. So that's that. Like I said, we look at stressed/stalled projects that are net worth positive. Now, this is a term that has been applied for the first time at a project level. It is something that is more easily understood with companies. And what do we mean by net worth positive? We mean where in projects where the cost to complete the project is less than the total receivables plus unsold inventory and the cost to service this debt, only this debt, the SWAMIH debt, right? So as long, what it essentially means is, as long as a project is inherently profitable, we can look at it, because this is in the nature of a fund that is trying to create an impact on society. So it will have if we are successful in what we're doing, we believe that this will have a huge social impact on society. At the same time, we will generate a very good return for our investors. So we are trying to achieve a dual objective, and that the world over has now been proven that social impact can come in only when commercial interests are also protected. And this is a way of in a way aligning those two interests, commercial interests as well as a social impact. Now, if a project, and therefore we look at only projects which are inherently profitable. Now, while this term is easy to understand, right, it's also a term which involves a lot of discussions within both our teams as well as our investment committee and so on. And I will get into what the investment committee is, but before that, the reason it gets into discussions is net worth positive depends upon what kind of assumptions are made on the pricing of the inventory, right? And all of us believe that it's possible to gain that. But we try to include some kind of stressed analysis when we are doing our underwriting. So we try and take a very conservative assumption on what the price of the apartment will be. We take a very conservative assumption on what the sales velocity will be. And when we look at both put together, we hope to establish that the project is net worth positive, that the project is profitable. If it is, then we can look at it. I mentioned about the investment committee. So to give just a very brief background about the investment committee, let me just trace a few steps back to the announcement. So the announcement was that the government would sponsor the fund, SBI Cap Ventures would manage the fund. The largest investor in this fund is the Government of India. The other two large anchor investors are the State Bank of India and LIC, right? The important thing here, and the only reason why I mention them here, is that none of these three investors have a say in the decision-making process of the fund. The decisions for the fund are taken by an investment committee. The investment committee includes independent real estate experts, right? So we have a committee of, so let me not get into too many specifics, but we have a real estate investment committee that includes, a legal specialist, a person who's a senior legal partner in a law firm, It includes a person who's the head of legal at a very large company. It includes a person who has spent significant amount of time heading construction companies, so someone who understands construction very well. And finally, also someone who understands, there's another person who understands investments very well. What they have in common is their legal expertise, their investment expertise, etc., is entirely in real estate. And this is the committee that takes investment decisions for the fund. So this was done to make sure that the process is both objective and transparent, that it isn't influenced by the investors, but a commercial decision is taken in the interest of investors and society at large. So that's about the investment committee. This fund was formed to provide last mile funding. And let me just quickly explain what we refer to when we talk about last mile funding. So when we talk about last mile funding, we talk about funding that by itself is sufficient to complete the project. Funding that is not dependent on any other sources of funding to complete the project, right? And how do you ensure that? And why do you require that, right? So how do you ensure that? You ensure that by simply seeing what is the cost to be incurred, and what is the maximum portion you can fund while the project is still net worth positive and the project is not overburdened by the interest that happens. And why do you need to ensure that? There are many ways of putting this. Let me just say it this way, that funding has been provided by a lot of institutions to complete projects in the past, right? And in spite of that, these projects have got stalled. So the old method has not worked. We cannot use the same method and expect different results. We have to, if we expect different results, we have to do things slightly differently. The thing we are doing differently here is that we are providing almost all the capital required to complete the project. We might have some reliance on receivables, but that's only on a small portion of the receivables. We would have next to no reliance on new sales, and therefore even projects which are not selling right now qualify for our funding, will get our funding, and will get enough funding to complete the project. That does not mean that the project is being overburdened by excess funding and interest cost, because the funding will be on an as required basis, right? So if the project is generating sales, if the project is generating cash flow from receivables, the amount of our funding that will be utilized for the project will be less than what we've sanctioned. But in no case, at least that's what we hope to achieve, in no case will the funding be less than what is required to complete the project in the next 2-3 years. The funding will be for construction only, and this is very important. And what is construction? Very clearly, we define construction as any expenditure in a project other than paying off lenders or paying liabilities related to RERA, related to customer refunds, and so on. So we are clearly, the focus of this fund is to provide capital to complete construction of the project. Therefore, that fund will be utilized for purchasing additional FSI as required, for purchasing, for architectural costs, for marketing, brokerage, for paying EDC, IDC charges, for actual construction, for approvals, everything the funding can be used for. The funding cannot be used for repaying lenders in the project. The funding cannot be used for repaying liabilities that arise on account of RERA, on account of other customer litigations, and so on. Because that will take care of only a small minority of the customers. We are in it to complete the entire project. And we are in it because the customers want us to complete the project, right? So that is the thing about construction. We will complete projects, right? And this flows in some ways from the last mile bit I emphasized about. We will complete projects that have already started. The fund will not start any new projects. The fund will not do greenfield ventures. The fund will only look at projects which are at least 30% complete. And how do you measure whether a project is 30% complete? Yardsticks vary across the country, right? If you look at visible progress in places like, especially down south, places like Hyderabad, where basement construction takes a lot of time. a lot of time and money will go on the basement construction. The project is actually significantly completed, even as it starts emerging from the ground. In some other places, let's say in most places in NCR, there is very little upfront land cost which is utilized for purchasing land because land is available on installments. That is significantly different from places like in MMR, where land itself is a very expensive cost of the project. So because of differences across the country, we have chosen to define stage of construction as percentage of the project cost complete. So as long as 30% of the project cost is complete, we can look at the project. The only finer detail here is when we are looking at 30% cost completion criteria, we are clearly excluding financial charges that have been paid in the past, any delay penalty charges that have been paid in the past. So we are only looking at capital that has resulted in progress in the project, not in terms of progress in paying liabilities or servicing liabilities and so on. And that's something also that we look at from an asset management point of view. Once we are invested, our entire focus is to ensure that our funding goes to physically progress the project towards completion. So that's about the construction bit. We are clearly looking only at projects which are RERA registered, because RERA has brought the rule of law into this industry, results in a lot of safeguards both for the home buyer as well as for the investor and so on. And we will still look at projects which either do not have RERA registration, and we'll require them to get a RERA registration while we do the rest of the due diligence work, so that the RERA registration is available as a condition precedent to the first disbursement. We will also look at projects where the RERA registration has expired, right? And we will insist that the RERA registration be renewed before we start funding the project. Finally, and this is probably important given the context here, the fund was clearly announced and the capital is clearly available for projects that are either NPAs with banks or are either knocking on the doors of NCLT or are going through NCLT proceedings. Fund has some intrinsic NCLT protection under IBC, and therefore can provide last mile funding to projects that are either going to go through an NCLT process or can provide that last mile funding to a resolution applicant who is providing a resolution package to a company which is undergoing CI, corporate insolvency resolution process, right? So a resolution applicant can approach the COC, take the creditors, enter into a commercial agreement with the creditors, or buy the creditors at whatever price works in that deal, and then look at getting funding from us to complete the project. So that's a bit about the entire mandate of the fund. Just in terms of a quick update, like I said, we've progressed significantly from a launch on 6th of November, an announcement on 6th of November to a closure. So the fund has raised capital and done its first closing on 6th of December. The speed at which this has happened, the scale at which it has happened, has never ever been replicated in the past. It has never happened in the past. That is one. Two, since December 6th, when the fund did its closing, the fund has progressed considerably on several parameters. So we now have a team of almost 30 investment professionals, probably the largest team in the country to look at real estate proposals, investments, at least among private equity funds. So that's one. We have already sanctioned proposals in excess of 100. So we are currently looking at about 120 proposals that have received some sort of sanction. And we have a two-stage sanction process. So we first give a proposal a preliminary approval. We then do extensive due diligence. And then we again go back to the investment committee with the results of the due diligence and take a final approval. It's only after that some certain condition precedents are specified, and then funding is completed funding is done for the project. So as a result, we have about 120 proposals that have been taken through the investment committee. about 27 proposals have actually got final clearance. And between them, we are completing about 75,000 plus homes, about 78,000 homes. So about 78,000 homes stand to get completed when we start disbursements on these approvals. And that's a significant progress given the fact that we are about 9 months or slightly more since the closure of the fund. And we've been through, not just this fund team, obviously, but the entire country has been through a very difficult situation in the last 5 odd months, 6 odd months, where as a result of the COVID epidemic, due diligence was getting delayed, interactions and finalizations of documents were getting delayed, execution of documents were getting delayed, expenditure at construction sites was subdued, primarily because of the lockdown effect that was seen in various parts of the country. In spite of that, we've used that time very profitably. We've used that time to create a huge backlog of deals, huge pipeline of deals, so that if, as and when the situation, and it is gradually improving, we can start funding more and more deals. So we can claim to have done our homework during this period, and the 120 odd proposals that we've sanctioned will complete about 78,000 housing units. On that note, on that high note, let me keep quiet for some time and answer questions as they are asked. Thank you.
So we've already received a lot of questions. So we can start with the first question, which is if the financing is given by way of, is the financing given by way of debt or by way of subscription of some debt instrument? And what sort of debt instrument can be made into a partnership form?
So the funding is provided by the way of debt. We are an alternative investment fund, and AIF can only invest in debt securities. It cannot provide loans. So the funding is provided by subscribing to NCDs, non-convertible debentures, issued by the developer company. I'll use this opportunity to even emphasize on the nature of the funding. So our funding is, like the rest of the fund entire being, structured towards completion of construction. So there are no coupons paid at intermittent periods of time. There is no principal repayment that starts immediately. There is no repayment that happens till the entire construction is completed. And thereafter, and only thereafter, cash flows that are there in the project are brought back for repayment of the principal to the fund. So the entire funding is provided in a manner to complete construction. In terms of payment, it's completely back-ended, and in terms of cost, we have done a uniform costing across borrowers. So all our funding is at 12% IRR. That said, to answer the specifics of that question, a partnership firm cannot do debentures. So we cannot provide funding directly to partnership firms. And even as I say that, I can also tell you that we are providing funding to a lot of projects that were being developed by partnership firms. And how are we doing that? As soon as a proposal comes to us, we also ask the partnership firm to start the process of conversion into a company. And while we do the due diligence, and while we appraise the project, and while we get the approvals, the partnership firm gets converted into a corporate structure, so that we can do funding for that corporate structure, so that we save on time and we yet make it possible to provide funding for that project.
Okay, so another related question only is that what is the interest rate that is charged? I think you already answered that. And is it different interest rates based on net worth and quantum of the loan taken?
So we are not differentiating, and we are not differentiating because the traditional parameter, in finance is if the risk profile of the project is high, then the return needs to be similarly compensated, right? So if the project is risky, the return is, let's say 14%. If the project is more risky, the investor will expect a 16% rate of return. And these are all stress projects. So we had to apply that, traditional rule to what we are focusing on, the asset class that we are working with. And we are working with stress projects. The moment we increase the interest rates, some of these projects will become not profitable, and therefore we will not be able to fund them. So it's almost like that will be a body blow, a death blow to these projects. and therefore we've kept a standard IRR of 12%. And just let me quickly explain this. I already mentioned that it's entirely back-ended. There are no coupon payments. All the cash inflows, even from the project, will be focused on construction only during the construction period, and repayments will start only after the construction is complete. The IRR is 12%. If you look at it in terms of what is probably more easily understood, that is a loan and an interest rate. The interest rate is closer to about 11.25, about 11.25%, depending on the timing of the cash flows. So we are talking of funding that is being provided to projects that are really stressed and therefore have a completely different risk profile from projects that are doing well, and yet this funding is at interest rate of around 11.25%. Most of the private equity funds that would typically do these projects would, one, do them at maybe 20% plus, and two, most probably not do these projects, right? So that's where the government steps in.
Okay. So another related question is that with home loan interest rate hitting an all-time low, do you visualize a greater play for Swami Fund as a bridge finance for near completion projects?
So I'm not sure what is this. So the fact that home loan rates are at all-time lows also means that affordability is at significant highs, if not all-time highs, right? So I will not get into superlatives, but affordability today is far better than it has been for some time. That coupled the low interest rate coupled with interest subvention schemes, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the credit link subsidy scheme, plus the fact that home sizes have reduced, ticket sizes have fallen, homes are in more affordable locations because the infrastructure has improved, etc., means that affordability has improved, and this fund is targeting affordable projects. So we are targeting to complete those projects which are inherently affordable to buyers, and therefore we are confident that once they are completed, they'll sell. Use the lingo, jo dikhta hai wo bikta hai. So, once the home is completed, the probability that it will be sold is significantly higher than what it is today.
Right. So another question is that is 1 crore 30 lakh realizable value after marking down prices to reflect larger issues like economic downturn, existing unsold inventory, and consumers looking for markdown prices. Is it considered by the fund? So basically, I think the question is that does the fund look at factors such as economic downturn and unsold inventory while it's making its decision as to who gets the benefit?
So we do look at the economic downturn. We don't expect to see a project which has significant sales in the past, right? We hope to get it's easier for us to look at projects which have significant price discovery that has also happened. But even if there have not been sales in the recent past, we will still look at it, try and make some assumptions on the price, etc. I'm not sure if that question was about that, or was it, is there a minimum amount that we would fund, right? So just giving it the benefit of the doubt, and that's simply because I haven't understood it completely. Let me also clarify on that, which is we do not have a minimum project size. We do not have a minimum investment amount. But given the fact that we go through a complete due diligence process like any other private equity fund, it would be far better it makes more sense from a cost point of view to look at proposals in excess of 10 crores. And therefore we can look at proposals from 10 crores to up to 400 crores in any single project, and up to 800 crores with any developer.
Okay. So the next question is that is funding done at a SPV level for each project, or is funding only done by for the promoter company?
So I'll use the question as a cue to talk about how we do the funding, right? So funding is done at the project level only. Funding is done for the project only, and funding is entirely in our control, not in control of the developer or the promoter. Funding is in fact done on almost a weekly basis. as the project progresses, as expenses are incurred. There is no lump sum funding that happens. It's not like we approve an X amount and that is deposited with either the promoters or the developers in maybe 2-3 tranches or anything like that. We do funding in a way that it is entirely linked to physical completion of the project. We do funding in small tranches, while we are extremely liberal when it comes to allocating funds for completion, and we ensure that our funds by itself are sufficient to complete construction. We also ensure that the funds are only used for construction and for nothing else. So our team is responsible not just for the investment, but for the even more difficult part of asset management. They virtually act as the CFO of the project. They are getting daily reports from the site on material and labor movements. We have appointed, and we will be appointing project management companies in every project that we fund, so that PMC company has a representative at the site, right? So we get daily reports on site activity. We also get reports on analysis of labor costs, and analysis of material costs, etc. Once those costs are approved, we then do the funding.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Sir, another question is that as an insolvency professional, if an insolvency professional is handling a project of a real estate company, how can they make use of this fund for completion of their stalled project if the criteria of the project is met?
So, when an insolvency professional is trying to restructure a company, to revive a company, or a resolution applicant is trying to revive a company, there are two kinds of fundings that they are looking for, right? And I'm talking specifically of this asset class. One, funding which is required to funding or a plan which is required for the existing creditors in the company, and two, funding which is required to complete the construction. Care of one portion of this, that is, we are willing to provide funding for completion of the construction. So the applicant or the IRP has to formulate a package, a plan to get the creditors along or to buy out the creditors. So we do not provide that buyout financing. What we provide is funding to complete the project.
Okay, sir. Somebody has asked a question in continuation. Does Swami funding also constitute interim finance, as is provided in the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code?
Yes. The IBC code was amended when the fund was launched to provide for the Swami fund to be recognized as interim funding.
So another question we have is that is there any scope for revision in the benchmark per unit cost beyond 2 crores?
So we already are dealing with a significant situation. Like I said, the current definition already takes care of a very large part of the problem. Any discussion on further widening this is more of a policy decision, so it's not for me to comment on that.
And so the last question that we have is it only for body corporates that this fund is available for?
Yes and no, right? So we can only invest in debentures, like I mentioned. Debentures can only be issued by body corporates, but we can look at projects that are being developed by individuals or by or by proprietorship firms, by partnerships, and we can look at funding them when they convert into a corporate structure.
Okay. So a couple of more questions. If there is a grievance that needs to be registered for like with the fund, then how is it registered and who takes care of that grievance? How is it disposed of?
So it's a grievance about the project. It's a grievance about the fund, against the fund.
About the fund,
so
against the fund.
To us, if you have a problem with something that we are doing and you write to us, we will definitely one, you'll be the first to have done so. And 2, we will definitely find some resolution to it.
Okay. Sir, another question is that, sir, are the projects only selected if can the investment manager also select the projects suo moto? Like, can they by themselves identify projects that need funding and fund them?
So projects come to us from 3-4 different sources. Projects can come to us from the developer. So the developer can come to us seeking our funding. Projects come to us through brokers. Brokers can approach us to seek funding. Projects can come to us from resolution professionals, right? Projects can come to us from lending agencies, so from NBFCs or from banks. They can refer projects to us. And finally, a lot of projects also come to us through our website from all these, from any combinations of all these. So we have activated our website. We have created a very detailed FAQ on that website to help people understand the nature of the funding. And we have also loaded the application form and the address to look at. So most of our deals come to us through our website. So it can come to us either directly from developers or banks, or it could come to us through brokers. And let me be very, very categorical and clear about it. We have 1, no preferred broker, and 2, we will look at a deal whether there is a broker involved or not. It doesn't necessarily need to have a broker or an investment banker.
Okay. So another question is that, is there any criteria of profitability or cash flow ratios that is considered?
No, there is no criteria. The project needs to be cash flow positive or net worth positive. And then there are so many different things that decide whether we would do that project or not. So one is a filter criteria. So it should be affordable and mid-income. It should be 30% complete. It should be net worth positive. That is the criteria which determines if the project qualifies for funding, and then whether we actually do the funding is an investment decision that depends on many different factors, trade-offs that are there in every investment.
Okay. So somebody has asked if the ineligible units are more than 10%, they may be 15% or so in the project, will the project still be considered for funding?
So yes, we can still look at it. We'll find a way of structuring it. We'll find a way of excluding some of those units so that it meets the fund criteria. And if that happens, then we will fund the project.
Okay. So another question was that if let's say a project is undergoing corporate insolvency process, and the proceedings have reached High Court or Supreme Court, as we've seen recently in many cases. If the proceedings are stayed by the High Court or the Supreme Court, will those projects still be considered for funding if they apply?
This would be on a case-by-case basis. We'll have to get into specifics. The only test that we'll have is that can our funding restart the project, or are there other factors, judicial proceedings or whatever, which are going to, which would not make it possible for us to start construction. So if funding is the solution that is required to start the project, right, then we are willing to provide the funding. But if there are other issues which will, in spite of funding being available, the project cannot progress ahead because of title issues on the land, because of litigations that are currently underway, then we will not be able to fund the project.
Okay. So another question is that what is the time frame for preliminary sanction after all the information is submitted?
So part of the time frame is under our control, and what's under our control, I can very humbly say we excel at it in terms of keeping the time frame to the very minimum. We have an investment committee that meets almost every week. As a result, we can take a proposal to an IC maybe in 15 days or so. But that is the part which is within our control. What is not within our control is the quality of the information we get. So we have to ask questions and get answers, right? And it takes time for some companies to compile the information, or collate the information and send it to us. So that's one time factor. Two, we do an external due diligence. Again, due diligence agencies, whether it's legal, financial, forensic, or whatever, ask a lot of questions, ask to see a lot of documents, right? And they need to get answers, they need to get the material. If there is a delay in providing that, there is a delay in processing of the proposal. So that's the other bit. Just give me a second here to complete. The other bit is we are also dependent on other lenders in the project. So, unfortunately, what I didn't mention is we provide only priority funding. We enter a project, we do last in, first out kind of funding. So we are senior most in the capital stack, which means that if there are existing lenders in the project, those lenders have to cede charge, right, and allow us to come in. So they have to give a NOC, they have to sign an intercreditors agreement and so on. And therefore, we've been able to do deals that have no lenders much faster than deals which have lenders.
Okay.
So those are the external factors, and there is one last factor, and my apologies for a rather long question, a long answer to a seemingly short question. That when we provide the funding and we say the company also has to achieve certain milestones. So, for example, if there is no environmental clearance in place, the company has to get that. Without that approval, funding cannot be provided, since any progress in construction is illegal. Similarly, if it's a partnership firm, then it needs to be converted, right? And that conversion might take some time in some cases, right? All those time factors are not within our control. What's within our control is the analysis bit and the internal diligence bit and getting the internal approvals, and we do it. The fact that we've done 120 cases in the last 9 months or so is enough testimonial of the fact that we do it faster than it has ever been done before.
True. Sir, another question is that will the fund share cash flow with existing lenders also? And if yes, how much could the sharing be for the existing lenders?
The questions, right? The questions are, pointing out parts of my speech that I was supposed to talk about, but I didn't. So yes, we provide priority funding. We take a senior charge on the asset. The existing lender has to cede charge. The existing lender does not get any cash flows. So what we did is, and therefore there was some resistance from the existing lenders. And therefore, in consultations with the sponsors, that is the Government of India, we decided that we'll share some portion of the cash flows from the asset with the existing lenders. And very clearly, what we are sharing is not our funding, but cash flows in the project, other cash flows in the project. So our funding will be used only for construction. But collections from receivables, collections from sold inventory, a portion of that, maybe 10-20% of that will flow to the existing lender. And while 10-20 might sound, irrelevant and small, what I need to emphasize is that the balance 80 to 90% of those cash inflows will not come to us, which will be pumped back into the project to complete the project.
Okay. So another question is that what are the timelines for completing the due diligence by the fund before the disbursement? Do you have any internal timelines or something like that?
So the due diligence is not in our control. It's not a timeline that we control. It's a timeline that's controlled entirely by the company. So we've had due diligences that have got completed in less than a month, and due diligences that have continued for about 3 months, right? So the due diligence agency will ask the company for documents, will ask the company for information, and it can only go on as fast as the information is provided and the quality of the information that is provided. Plus, there are issues that are discovered, issues that need to get resolved, right? All that will determine the time taken for the due diligence. But generally, if I have to average, if I have to exclude the outliers, right, the average time is about maybe 40 days or so.
Okay. So another question is that how many proposals have been received by the fund so far, out of which a preliminary sanction has been given to about 120 proposals?
So we are a very public private equity fund, and we've regularly shared details of how many approvals we've got, etc. We have got in excess of maybe 500 proposals. That number keeps, so as we process proposals, that's a current number, right? So as we process proposals, the number reduces, and as we get more proposals, that number increases. So at any point in time, we've always had, in excess of maybe 500 proposals. We've approved is what I mentioned already. We've provided preliminary sanction to about 90 proposals, final approval to about 27 proposals, and put together they would complete about 78,000 home units. So there is a reason why I mentioned the home units and I have not mentioned the amount sanctioned. We do not share publicly the information on how much we are investing with the developer companies, because that makes it difficult for that developer to negotiate with their contractors and so on. What we therefore measure our progress in terms of the number of home units that we'll be completing. And we can therefore proudly say that, about 78,000 units will be completed as a result of our funding.
Sir, another question we've received is that can end user funds be made for pending FSI or premium payments?
All project related payments can be funded using using the capital we provide, except for basically two buckets. One is repayment to lenders. So none of the capital can be used for repayment to lenders. Two, the capital cannot be used for repayment of interest, penalties, refunds for home buyers, right? So aside from these two, the capital can be used for any funding which is required to complete the project.
Right. Sir, another question is that how has COVID affected the fund, and has the suspension of IBC that has happened because of COVID had some effect on the number of proposals that have been received by the fund?
The suspension has not. We've not seen any correlated increase or decrease in the number of proposals we've seen, right? So if it has, it's not reflected in the numbers. That's one. Two, how has COVID affected the fund? Despite COVID, we've put up, and it's not just a brave fight. We've achieved several milestones in the last 9 months. So we've achieved progress similar to what most private equity funds would have achieved in 5+ years in less than 9 months. The way COVID has affected is the due diligence process got slowed, the execution process got slowed, right? While these numbers seem a lot and seem very fast, we could have been closer to even higher number and even larger progress, but for the fact that documents, most of the real estate documents are in physical form. They are generally locked up in some office somewhere. They were not in a digital form so that they could be shared with the due diligence agencies. Because of the lockdown related issues, the traditional gathering to sort out issues, etc., was not taking place. Due diligence therefore took a longer period of time. So that's one. Execution of documents, right? Payment of stamp duty, all that has got affected. So that has delayed it to some extent. But all our lives have changed to a very large extent as a result of this. What we've tried to do is, in spite of these restrictions, we've achieved spectacular progress. And I could be humble about it, but that would be not fair to my team, right? We have achieved spectacular progress in the last 9 months.
Okay. So another question that we have is that what is the minimum and the maximum loan size?
So I mentioned that we do not have a minimum specified, but given the fact that there are costs associated with the due diligence process, most of the proposals we look at are between 10 to 400 crores. So that way we are different from typical private equity fund that has a sweet spot and will say that we'll do deals only of $25 million or of 75 crores or between 75 to 125 crores. None of that. We look at deals across the spectrum from 10 crores to 400 crores, and we look at deals across India. So at last count, we have already given final approval to projects. I could be wrong, but maybe about 45, 50 locations across India.
Okay. So these are the questions that we have received. Sir, also can you name some of the major projects that have been funded or are being funded by the fund?
So we will not, provide details on our deal pipeline, the deals that we are evaluating. What we do is periodically we release a list of the projects that have got sanctioned, and this, that was done recently by the Finance Ministry itself. So that is, the channel that we use. We do not also respond to individual queries about, we get many letters every day saying, are you looking at this developer? Are you looking at this project? What stage is the approval in? How much have you funded, and so on. So while a ball by ball commentary is good for IPL, as a fund, we maintain, we keep our head down and try to progress with the funding that we are supposed to do.
Okay, sir. Sir, another question we've received right now is that what is the cost associated for developer leading to the final approval? I think what they mean is that what is the cost for applying
of due diligence? Yeah.
Yes,
sir. So the cost, if you look at cost as a complete package, right? The cost is about 12% IRR. The rest of the costs are either not there or are insignificant, right? So there we do not have an application fee. We do not have a processing fee. We do not have an annual fee. We do not have a commitment fee. And it's not like we don't have a vocabulary, we do, but we only charge an IRR, right? Okay. So we have only an IRR, that is the cost of the fund. The upfront cost for the developer will be, in addition to that, will be the diligence cost. And the diligence cost, we do a financial due diligence, a legal due diligence, a corporate due diligence, forensic due diligence, and so on in every deal valuation, in every deal that we do. And that diligence cost generally varies between, we've seen diligence cost to be as low as about 10 lakhs to as high as maybe 30 lakhs or so. Anywhere between that, depending on the size, complexity. So if it's a one company SPV, the diligence cost will be tremendously different from where, it's in a holding company with, 30 other deals, right? And depending on the size and the complexity of the deal, the diligence cost will vary. So that's that. That's the only cost.
Okay. So another question is that once a project is approved for funding and it had been undergoing the insolvency process, will the insolvency process be stayed or will it be considered to be withdrawn?
So I think and maybe that's a question I should be asking you.
So
right?
I think
rather
yes,
than be
sir.
forced to answer.
So I think it will be
Please
considered
go
to
ahead
be
and answer
stayed.
it.
Yes, sir. So I think it will be considered to be stayed and not withdrawn because they will have other creditors for whom they will have to have a resolution plan which will need to be which will need approval. So I don't think it will stand to be withdrawn. I think, and it also won't be stayed as such. I think the process will go on as it is. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I think that will depend on the specifics also. So I rely on experts like you to announce that answer there, and I'll keep quiet now.
So that is it. Like, I don't think it will be withdrawn or stayed. I think it will again depend from a project to project basis. If they have creditors of other nature than home buyers, then yes, the CIRP process will keep going on as it is, and only for the home buyers will this fund provide a solution.
Yeah, but it could also be that the resolution applicant buys the underlying debt, right? Maybe at some discount, some haircut, and so on, and takes over the underlying debt, and then approaches us for funding. So in those cases, it would be the CIRP process is over and done.
Is over
and now
and
we are
done.
looking at, in those cases only. So it depends on the specifics of every situation.
Right, sir. So another question that we have is, if a borrower is declared as a willful defaulter, will still provide funding to such a borrower?
So as a fund, our target is not to provide funding to to rescue the developer, right? The target is to rescue home buyers. So we are willing to, if we take a high and mighty stance that there have been issues of integrity with a developer, there have been, various lapses in the past, and we decide not to do the project, right? The only person that really suffers in the process is the home buyer, and that is the person that this fund has been designed to rescue. So we will look at deals where there are issues with the developer, and yet fund the project, because that comes with certain confidence and certain measures that we've implemented, that our funding will be to complete the project. We'll be in control of the capital flow. We will act as CFOs to the project, and therefore the developer will get to maybe look at the money but not maybe feel or smell the money, right, as it flows through the project for completion. That said, we also require the NOC of the lenders, right? And if the lenders in some cases, especially for willful defaulters and fraudulent accounts, will not give us an NOC. So if they do not give us an NOC, we will not be able to do it.
Okay. So another question is that, is conversion cost also funded, like conversion of a partnership firm into a private limited body corporate? Will it also be funded by the fund?
Yes. So we try to make the process as easy as possible. We start the analysis even while the conversion is going on, so that no time is lost. And we will fund everything, including brokerage that is involved in the transaction, conversion cost that is involved in the transaction, closing cost that is involved in the transaction, stamp duty, registration cost, etc., and even PMC cost, project management. In all our deals, we require that a project management company be appointed. So we include all these costs in the project cost that we are funding.
Okay. So another question is that if a developer is let's say a government company, will that also be considered for funding?
So we have never come across this situation.
So I don't think it's a very realistic situation.
Yeah.
So another similar question is an LLP eligible for funding?
So I answered that yes, we will evaluate it while it gets converted to a corporate structure.
All right. So I think that's all the questions that we have.
You say that you ask one more, so I'm just.
So because the participants keep sending questions, but
no, I can understand that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So right now we have no more questions.
Okay,
I
thank you
would
so much.
request all the participants, if they have any questions, then they can ask right now, because we have an opportunity right now to ask questions. So we received another question. So so this is 1 second. It is if this fund is primarily funded by SBI and LIC, in many cases LIC, if LIC itself does not give an NOC, then is there a solution to it given by the fund?
So LIC does not do real estate funding, to the best of my knowledge. We've not seen any proposals. So LIC HFL, Housing Finance, does provide funding to projects, and that is like any other lender. We require the NOC if we are to fund the project. With the NOC, we can fund the project. If we don't get the NOC, we cannot fund the project.
Okay. So another question, we have again received another question. So it is that LLP is a body corporate, so will it still require to be converted?
Can LLP issue debentures?
Sir,
So
I think
if it can, then we can do the funding. If it can't, then we can't.
okay. So I think that is all. I think those are all the questions.
Great. Thank you.
Right. So thank you so much for taking out the time to address all the queries and all the questions of all the participants, and also explaining everything to us.
No, my
So-
pleasure entirely. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to do my work, basically. This is part of my
Yes.
job description.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Sir, if Mr. Ankur Jain could say a few words for concluding, I think.
Surely, Irfan, it was a pleasure listening to you and again getting to know more about the progress of the fund as well as answering so many of the questions of the participants and engaging with them continuously. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Ankita, as well for moderating the session. And thank you all the participants for taking out time and enriching ourselves with the knowledge and the experience of Mr. Irfan. Thank you.
Can I just add this? Our website is sbicapventures.com. And, this may sound like a paid commercial, but, allow me to use this opportunity. We have uploaded several questions to explain the entire funding on our website, sbicapventures.com. The application form and the email ID for sending us proposals is also in those frequently asked questions. So anyone wanting to use Capital Providers Fund, is best advised to go there. You'll get all the answers that you require. It's far easier than trying to call the fund up and getting into details about specific projects. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.